The summer days in Washington, D.C. are typically hot, muggy, and sweaty. This year was no exception. It was the beginning of July, and the year was 1997, and a manager was showing up to her morning shift at the Starbucks location in Georgetown. As she approached the front door, she reached for her keys and unlocked the door. She walked inside, but was perplexed. She noticed the lights are on. Some of the chairs in a disarray from cleaning the night before. A bag of coffee with a receipt was purchased by one of the night crew was still sitting on the counter. Looking around, she started to get an eerie vibe. Why did they not finish cleaning? Why did they leave their coffee? And where is everyone? It was like everything was frozen in time. Her mind started wandering about the night before. Her awareness was heightened as she felt the hair on the back of her neck start to stand. Was this some kind of joke? Something was not right. She walked into the manager's office and a cold chill came over her. It was still, quiet, and then she saw them, laying on the floor, the bodies of 3 of her fellow employees, covered in blood, shot in the head. A rush of panic engulfed her. She quickly threw down all her items and ran for the front door. She made it outside where she saw a metro bus sitting half a block up the road at R Street. She ran down the road continuously screaming, "They're dead! They're all dead!" She was fleeing the horrific scene, and her safety was that metro bus. She screamed to the bus driver, "All my coworkers are dead." The bus driver immediately called his dispatcher, who then in turn called the police, and within minutes the entirety of Wisconsin Avenue and all surrounding blocks were shut down. When detectives arrived at Starbucks, they found the bodies of the 3 employees in the manager's office. What detectives found odd were the way the employees were killed. They were killed execution style. Detectives identified the dead employees as Mary Katie Mahoney, Emery Evans, Aaron Goodrich. This would be the start of an ongoing series of strange events surrounding the murders and this case. The detectives were puzzled, as clues they immediately found included the safe. It was never opened, and no money was ever taken. The safe had around $10,000 from the week of the 4th of July sales. All 3 employees were lined up and shot point blank in the head and chest. Casings from 2 guns were used, a .38 and a .380, but no weapons were ever found on the scene. Front and back doors were both locked, with no signs of forced entry and no signs of lock tampering. Mahoney, the only employee who knew the combination to the safe, was farthest from it. A bullet hole was found in the ceiling of the office, which could have been a warning shot or a sign of a struggle. All 3 employees had most of their possessions, and the manager still had her store keys. A shoe print by the front door did not match any of the employees' shoes. Oddly enough, one of the employees' cars, the only car in the parking lot, had a flat tire. The crime motive was unclear. As you will see, the more this crime was unsolved, the more strange twists this case will take. When we look at this area, the Georgetown neighborhood is a very wealthy one. Crimes like this did not happen. A triple homicide just doesn't happen here. Councilman Jack Evans at the time echoed these feelings by saying, "To have a triple homicide anywhere in the district is an unusual event. To have a triple homicide in Georgetown is extraordinary. Georgetown has never been a place where crime has been a problem." The more detectives started looking at these clues, the more this senseless crime just started becoming odd. When interviewing most of the neighbors in the area, it revealed that there were no sounds of gunshots heard. This prompted detectives to really speculate that a silencer was used. 2 neighbors at different times walked by the store. The first neighbor, around 9:15 p.m., he looked through the window and saw Evans and Goodrich cleaning. But when that first neighbor tried to enter the front of the store, the door was locked. The second neighbor approached the store just a little bit later at 9:30 p.m. He was able to go through the front door. It was unlocked. He walked up to the counter, saw the bag of coffee. He called for help, and no one came. He turned around, and he immediately left. Another neighbor claimed to see men running from the store to across the street in the direction of the secret park, but this could not be corroborated by any other witness. As it turned out, there were no usable fingerprints inside the shop, and aside from the shell casings, there was no other physical evidence. That morning, word had spread within the Starbucks leadership, and the CEO immediately arranged for security at all Washington, D.C. store locations. The CEO didn't call the company lawyers or the company public relations office, but instead jumped right on a plane and went straight to Washington, D.C. to visit the homes of the victims' families. Immediately, Starbucks also offered to pay for the victims' funerals. Starbucks also made a lump sum payment to the victims' families and established a memorial fund. Starbucks also offered a $50,000 reward, which grew to $100,000 in just a few months. The CEO then closed that store and spent some time remodeling it to reopen it almost a year later as a living memorial to the slain workers. All future profits from that one location would go to an organization concerned with victims of violent crime. To this day, that Georgetown location is a living memorial. After the remodel, that store was reopened with a wall featuring an entire floor-to-ceiling maplewood mural. It had the initials of each victim on these small boxes. Inside each box carried personal mementos from Mary Kate Mahoney, Aaron David Goodrich, and Emery Allen Evans, donated by their friends and family. That Georgetown location, for over 2 decades now, has supported more than 60 nonprofits, with more than $1.3 million in grant support generated from sales from that location. It is fair to say that Starbucks and its CEO went above and beyond for these families. At the same time the store location was being remodeled, the case started to take some twist. The case was becoming cold, and the victims' families were becoming upset with police and investigators. A series of long, strange police blunders made it really hard to get traction during the initial investigation. As a result, the case was thrown off course for several years. In the first 2 weeks, critical parts of the investigation were leaked to the press and websites. The leaks spun out of control. It became the talk of the town. And that talk would also help fuel urban legends and presidential connections, which we will get into in another video. Investigators asked about former employees, and one lead appeared right away. Katie had recently fired a male employee on the suspicion of theft. When several $100s turned up missing from the cash register, the police obtained his name and address and checked him out. He answered all their questions and claimed he had not been involved. They let him go and they said they found no evidence against him. But there were errors in his initial questioning. The ex-employee also did not have an alibi for his story. He also had similar shoes as the shoe print they found on the floor, and they thought they saw what looked like blood on his sneakers. But for some reason, the police did not take his sneakers at the time. Eventually, days later, the police had to go back with the warrant to get the shoes. The FBI tested the shoes, and they concluded that stain was not blood. After that, the ex-employee hired an attorney and he moved to California. Mahoney's family was distraught at police for allowing the suspect to go. The DC Homicide Investigators Department came under scrutiny later that year for receiving $2.4 million in overtime pay. A new chief commander reassigned all 17 homicide detectives. Shortly after the slayings, District Police enlisted the help of Brad G. He was an FBI special agent. Brad and other investigators were checking the backgrounds of current and former Starbucks employees. Another strange issue was the police chief himself. The chief would resign later that year over a peculiar connection to his roommate, who shared a luxury apartment with him. They lied about the apartment and said it would be used for full-time police surveillance to get a discounted lease, but they were both living in it full-time. At the same time, the chief's roommate was also under federal investigation. In addition, the roommate was on administrative leave with pay while being investigated by the FBI for allegedly misappropriating department funds and attempted extortion. These events influenced the investigation of the Starbucks case. And possibly the most bizarre blunder police made was with the murder of an informant claiming to have information related to the Starbucks murders. Eric Batura was a crack dealer and claimed to know some details of the murders. Eric said he was in a crack house on Delaware Avenue in Southeast when he overheard a few men discussing the Starbucks murder case. Police decided to follow up on his tip by having him go back to the house with marked bills to purchase drugs, so that when the bills were used, they can get a search warrant. They picked up Eric and drove Eric to the crack house, but Eric could not get in. The crack house refused to let him in. So Eric turned around and headed back to the pickup spot. When on the way, he was jumped by 2 men, assaulted, and then robbed. A third man came up and eventually killed him. All 3 men were captured by having the marked money and convicted of murder. To this day, police have never revealed what Eric Beretta believed tied the Delaware Avenue crack house to the Starbucks murders. Later, Eric's mother would sue the District of Washington, D.C. for not protecting Eric as a witness, and she would win. She would win a $100 million verdict. Later, a federal judge would reduce that. And if you think the Starbucks murder case is crazy, Eric Beretta's mother's lawsuit was also strange. The defense had used a fake specialist who lied about his qualifications in court, and Eric's mother's lawyer was able to find that out. This helped Eric's mother win. It is fair to say that Washington, D.C. in the 1990s was really plagued by scandals, corruption, and cronyism. A crack epidemic and the absurd amount of murders gave Washington, D.C. the nickname Murder Capital of the World. The FBI had a tip line, and a female called in to say she and her boyfriend knew of the Starbucks killer. She gave them an alias by the name of Cooper and the road where that person lived. Investigators used DMV records to help locate the location of Cooper. Once they found who Cooper was, they started digging into his background and wiretapping his phones. Investigators would convince the anonymous caller to provide her real info and then ask her to later record several conversations while wearing a wire. First, she started talking to her boyfriend, Cooper's accomplice, about Cooper's role in the Starbucks killings. They had phone conversations and tape recordings from Cooper's friends, but still did not have enough to charge him. In reality, Cooper was involved in so many crimes at this point. First, he was the ringleader of a small group of criminals. That group was robbing and killing in 3 surrounding states. Second, Cooper was the prime shooting suspect in an off-duty police officer in Maryland, and the killing of a security guard in Washington, D.C. Finally, investigators believed he was involved in the Starbucks murders too, since the anonymous tip connected him to those. The FBI and local authorities brought him in for questioning, related to his gang of offenses. However, each time they wanted to interview him, he refused his right to have a lawyer present, and he had some strange obsession with polygraphs, where each time he talked to police, he asked for a lie detector test, telling his partners he could beat them. Investigators didn't believe they still had enough to charge him, so they kept digging, and eventually Cooper would start to place himself at these crimes, but not as the perpetrator, but as the one who planned them. Then he would blame others in his groups for these crimes. In his first statement, he denied everything. In his second statement, Cooper lied to cover his tracks by blaming his friend, a fellow gang member. He told detectives that the person really wanted in the Starbucks murders was Keith Covington. Cooper also knew that Covington was interested in robbing the place. Cooper was then let go. They arrested Keith Covington the following day for felony firearm possession. He was taken to the Washington, D.C. FBI field office and questioned. Investigators would find that Covington had an alibi for the night of the Starbucks murders, so it wasn't him. And Covington's mother had revealed yet another strange connection. She told investigators that Keith and Emery, one of the Starbucks victims, were acquaintances, and Keith lived directly below Emery's apartment. She also mentioned that Keith went up to Emery's door and left a vase of flowers upon hearing of Emery's death. Investigators were realizing that Cooper knew way too much about these crimes, and eventually all roads would lead back to Cooper. So police picked up and interviewed Cooper again, and like before, while the investigators brought in members and friends of his criminal group to interview, Cooper had talked so badly about them that they eventually turned on him. His group named Cooper as the shooter, organizer, and driver of all these crimes. Cooper was caught at this point. He had to come clean. It was at this point a very odd dilemma happened. U.S. Attorney Janet Reno, appointed by President Bill Clinton, became aware of this case. She wanted Cooper to face the death penalty trial. Washington, D.C. had banned the death penalty. Still, Janet Reno would overrule Washington, D.C. judges and this law, not once, but twice. Each time she made it clear she wanted him to face the death penalty. He would certainly be executed if he was found guilty by trial. He would be the first execution in Washington, D.C. had in 30 years. Unbeknownst to Cooper, as he was writing his third confession, U.S. Attorney Janet Reno was getting involved. Although D.C. law does not provide for death penalty, federal law made it an option in the Starbucks case. He wrote his final testimony of what happened that summer night in 1997 at Starbucks, where he eventually came clean and admitted to all murders and crimes. Walking in, he forced all employees to the back office. Mahoney, the manager, refused. She refused to give Cooper the keys or the combination to the safe. When she refused, he shot, holding shot into the ceiling.
Mahoney started to run for the hallway. Cooper caught her and wrestled with her over the keys, and when she resisted, he shot her dead. Then Emery started to make a break for the door, but instead, Cooper pulled his gun up and shot them both quickly. Emery was still alive and moaning and in pain, but Cooper walked up, shot him twice in the head. Cooper told investigators he brought 2 guns, a .38 snub-nose revolver and a .380 pistol. He targeted the 4th of July weekend to rob the store because he knew the safe held the most money at that time. Coopers told authorities that he had been casing the location out for over a month. Finally, he told investigators that he was going to have Covington help him rob the store. But when he went to go rob the store, he never picked up Covington and went alone. Cooper would end up going on trial for racketeering as the leader of his group and also the murders he committed. But then, upon hearing of Janet Reno's involvement in the case, his lawyers quickly tried to save him by getting the RICO charges thrown out, which are federal racketeering charges. Cooper's lawyers were also trying to desperately have multiple murder charges thrown out. The lawyers put in several motions to suppress the wiretaps and some of his testimony because his testimonies were never visually or audio recorded. He also claimed that he was unaware of his Miranda rights, as he was questioned about the crimes in the states they were not committed in. At this point, investigators had a joint task force with all 3 states and the FBI overseeing it. Cooper's lawyers also tried to change his involvement in the Starbucks murders. Even after all the back and forth with investigators, his defense claimed it was not his style. He tried to have those charges dismissed from the upcoming trial. In the end, his defense, learning of the forced death penalty from U.S. Attorney Janet Reno, decided it would be in their best interest just to plead guilty and accept the judge's fate, then go to trial. This would remove Cooper from a death penalty trial and go directly to sentencing, but Cooper knew he would be locked away forever. At the sentencing, he approached the podium in front of the judge, and he said, "My purpose to be here today is to plead to all 48 counts of the indictment." The judge asked Cooper, innocent or guilty for each charge. Cooper said guilty 47 times. As Judge Joyce Hens Green painstakingly went through each murder, racketeering, robbery charge against him. As part of the plea deal Cooper signed, he was to get life with no hope of parole. That was the end for Cooper and the end of the Starbucks murder trials.